Welcome to Built by Us. My name is Brian Kennedy. I'm the policy director here at Democracy, North Carolina. Today, I'm joined by Debbie and Alexia, our second-year Friendterns, and we're going to have a conversation about the state of democracy and the future of advocacy and organizing here in North Carolina. Welcome to Built by Us.
Welcome. You're listening to Built by Us.
Built by Us.
Built by Us.
Built by Us.
Hi, I'm Brian, and I'm joined today by Debbie and Alexia. Debbie, I'm wondering if you can start off by telling us a bit about yourself and why do you do this work?
Sounds good. Thank you, Brian. So my name is Debbie Karamera, originally from Rwanda. So it's been an amazing 2 years calling North Carolina, specifically Chapel Hill, my home. I recently graduated with a Master's of Social Work and an International Certificate in Peace and Conflict Transformation from UNC Chapel Hill. I am also a Duke UNC Rotary Peace Fellow, which is an amazing program that then sponsored my education and led me to this amazing opportunity. And I am very excited to be here with Democracy Summer for the second time in a row. Second time is always a charm. And the reason why I am very interested in the work that Democracy North Carolina does is because of the impact that I've continued to see that the work that this non-partisan organization has been able to do, but also because particular focus is placed on young people who I always say, I know multiple people say this, they're all the future generation, but I actually believe in it. And so this is why I will always, choose Democracy NC time and time again.
Alexia, welcome to the show. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you do this work?
Yes, of course. So I'm Alexia. I just graduated from North Carolina A&T State University, where I studied political science. There I was involved in various civic engagement efforts. I served as president of my university's chapter of Black Girls Vote, and I also would work in the Office of Leadership and Civic Engagement. So voter engagement, voter education is something that I care very deeply about. And so I came back as a second year with Democracy North Carolina because there's always a growing need to, continue mobilizing and empowering our communities, but especially young people, as Debbie said. And I think Democracy NC is in a unique place where we don't only do research that lawmakers use to put forward better policies and legislation, but we also are very tapped in with our communities and, we educate, we empower. And so I think Democracy NC does an amazing job of doing both of those fronts. So I wanted to continue being involved with those efforts.
So you mentioned, being a student at NC A&T and the advocacy and work that you did on campus. This past year, really year and a half, we've seen major attacks on student voting. And in particular, we've seen efforts to remove early voting sites from campuses. That's impacted students not just at North Carolina A&T, but at Elon, Western Carolina University. And really, it's been, for years, it's been an ongoing thing about the ability for students to vote on campus. Can you talk a little bit about what elections advocacy, but also early voting and this entire conversation, the impact that it has on students and also people who just work at universities and live around the areas?
Right. Yes. No, it's definitely very unfortunate. I think, when we're limiting and even removing early voting sites from colleges or restricting hours that they're open, they are direct attacks on uh, college student voting access. I think, especially because college voters go through unique challenges that maybe older generations don't often consider. I'll especially talk about A&T. Freshman students aren't allowed to have cars. So if you move a polling site from being on campus to being somewhere else, you have to hope that a freshman student or whoever has an upperclassman buddy that they can catch a ride with to the polls, or that they have the money for taking rideshare, like catching a Uber or Lyft, and that's just not always realistic. And so you're definitely taking away that level of access for that population, but it also creates confusion, right? Like when, people and students are used to voting at a specific polling site and have been for years, they may not be properly made aware that that polling site is no longer there. And so then they have to go through the work to figuring out, okay, well, where am I now located? And also A&T is split into different zip codes, so they may have a different polling site from if you stay on the north side of campus compared to the south side of campus. So it's all these different things that you know, people who are not in college may not consider. And I also think that goes beyond A&T, but A&T specifically is the largest HBCU, not just in North Carolina, but in the nation. And you're taking away that access to be able to, voice your concerns and elect those who you wish from the university who has the most, you know, Black students. And so I think it's definitely an attack on college student voting when you are removing those polling sites from college campuses. And also, to your point about people who work there, right? So not just students use the polling site, but professors, deans, you think about the dining hall workers, you think about parking services, the library, people who work in the student union, like all these people could rely on having a campus voting site that they can easily go to vote at before or after their shifts. And so they would then have to be able to go out of their way and go somewhere, like somewhere else. And so that's definitely, discouraging people from wanting to go vote.
One of the kind of arguments I've heard around student voting, and it's not a new argument, but it's one that they keep using, is that these students aren't really from here, so it shouldn't be easy for them to vote here. But clearly, you're a student, you are deeply involved. Can you talk about like how do students see themselves in the political homes when they're on campus, and why is it important that we consider students as residents and as voters?
Right. And that type of notion and rhetoric that just because you're from a different area, you can't vote here is, far from the truth. Because as a college student, you're living on your college campus or in the area 8 months out of the year. So you're spending the majority of the time in that area. And then going on top of that, um, you are not just voting for, the president or state elections, you're also voting for local elections. And so, as we know, those kind of decisions affect people a lot sooner than, decisions that are made on a federal level. So, if you are removing the right to vote from, someone who lives in Greensboro or Durham or Raleigh or wherever, just because, they're from a different state, you're denying them the opportunity to have a say in a community where they live the majority of the time now. And oftentimes, a lot of students who graduate stay in the same state. So you want them to be able to feel as though they have a say in what's going on because they should. And they do.
Debbie, kind of similar question. You're coming from a different perspective, an international student who's decided to put down roots and to work in our community. As a North Carolinian, I'm grateful for you bringing your knowledge and your expertise, but I'm curious if you can talk more to that point of why do you feel like it's important for you to do work and to place roots here in North Carolina?
One of the things I think just I want to piggyback off something Alexia mentioned in terms of like when you think about student life, oftentimes one of the things that draws you to a place is the hospitality and the way people treat you. And that's not just whether people are friendly, but it's also in terms of like how you're able to ensure like you give your voice into spaces where you need your voice to be given. And so with the point Alexia mentioned in terms of saying like also to your point of like students, the claim is that a lot of the students who are coming to A&T are not students there, but they live there for majority of their time. I would say like for me, one of the reasons that I continue to, for instance, stay in Chapel Hill, just like you asked me, is because of how welcome I felt, how the community was welcoming to me, but also being an international student, as you may know, we still continue or had continued to face like a couple of challenges when it came to like issues around immigration. And so if you're living in a place where you don't feel there's support, even in terms of your contribution to that community, you feel like it's limited. And so for me, the reason why I felt like a place like DMNC was a wonderful opportunity for me to not only learn but also get more involved in the community. One of the books that we're reading, Give Us the Ballot, during this summer experience, really taught me a lot about the Voting Rights Act, which is something that you would hear about it in passing, but then getting to see how something like that ended up, leading to so much bloodshed, but at the same time, so much resistance. And so for me, I always like to think of myself as someone who wants to be part of something that's bigger than myself. And so being in this community, it's not only about learning, but also like being able to give some of those small experiences that I have experienced in my own culture, where things such as like, trauma healing, which also is very closely linked to democracy, very closely linked to everything civic rights and civil rights movements, because a lot of that is you tend to see like our forefathers, they lived through a lot, they experienced a lot, and sometimes it's very hard for them to even speak about these experiences because of how harsh they were to them. And so you end up having like a generation of young people who then don't even know a lot about the past unless they read about it from books. And as someone who comes from a society that's really uses a lot of oral traditional storytelling, I believe in the power of that. And I believe in like providing spaces for, the amazing individuals, communities who came out and who have been part of this, civil rights movement, so that they can be able to share those stories with the younger generation, so then they can feel like their voice actually matters.
I really appreciate you sharing that. I think, especially the point about just oral traditions and just the importance of passing generational knowledge from one to the next. Um, but it is, I mean, in my own experience, it's been the case, and kind of as you mentioned, like it can be really, a lot of this stuff is actually traumatic. A lot of the experiences that got us the rights that we have today, um, you know, uh, people are not here who fought for those rights. And oftentimes we'll be at home and hear a news story about somebody, an uncle who desegregated a school, or just these news, these surprising but unsurprising stories. And a lot of them are kind of not shared because of the trauma or just the really difficult feelings associated with them. But to the point that you're making, like drawing that connection from one generation to the next is extremely important, so that we know what we did not have and how we got what we have today. And so you mentioned the Voting Rights Act, and so I'd love to talk a little bit more about that. So as you all know, with the Callais decision at the U.S. Supreme Court, it really had a dramatic impact on the current Voting Rights Act, and specifically Section 2, which is a huge part of the protection. So I'm curious if you can talk, well, and I'll just go on to say, we saw that decision happen, and then in North Carolina, almost immediately afterwards, we saw an effort to change voting laws at the local level, specifically in Jacksonville, where there's an effort to take away control from city elected officials, and to make changes at the state level that would essentially introduce discrimination into the city council selection process. And so I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about why federal protections are so important, and what we can do to ensure that everybody has access at the ballot, even when we're seeing these attacks at the federal level.
I mean, one of the things I did was also, because, sometimes when you speak about an issue, it's also important for you to read to actually understand what this means. And one of the things I found when I was reading about what this means, especially for the citizens of Jacksonville, and here in specifically, I'm talking about like Black voters, this also means that you will find, if this, continues the way on the same trajectory that it's continuing, you will have very minimal representation. And when I say minimal representation, it's along the lines of like where you'll find like for people who are not able to be part of that process, that means some of them will be automatically excluded. And so this in most cases means we'll see, a lot of Black neighborhoods not being part of this process. And when we think back to Section 2 and why the Voting Rights Act was put in place in the first place, was to dismantle some of these very things that we are seeing coming back again to haunt us in 2026. So for me, when I think about that, and I think about why it's important for us, to not only be mindful of this, but to take action against it, is because most times when you think about what the Supreme Court is doing, it raises concerns even for me as an individual, even though I'm not an individual of Jacksonville, but I feel for the people of Jacksonville. And that's what it takes for first and foremost, to be able to understand that even though you're not a constituent of that area, you can still be able to bring your voice, because if it's been done in Jacksonville, it's also going to be done in other areas. And so for me, one of the things that I'm hoping to do is to continue to be vigilant. When we think about like ways that we can contribute to this process is being vigilant, but also right now I see technology has made it easier for us to be able to access information. So we're able to see what's happening at the federal level. We're able to see like what are some of the like electoral systems that are currently failing us. I say us because at the end of the day, it's always about us as individuals and not a single person. And so with this, it means that we should be able to be at a point, if we have access to information, we should be at a point where we're able to connect with the communities. And I was having a conversation with Alexia and we're asking ourselves, if we did not get involved with Democracy NC, would we be knowing about some of these bad bills, for instance, that are being passed by, elected officials? And so I came to the conclusion that now that we know, we should be able to kind of develop like a chain where we know, but we are also passing this information along to other individuals so that they can be able to take actions. And so for me, this is how I would respond to this question. But also, we should also be able to ensure, like, when we think about like access to the ballot, we are not only helping people to register, but we are helping them to think beyond that process of registration. Because I believe like when those who started some of the civil rights movements that came into place that then led to the establishment of the Voting Rights Act, they wanted citizens to feel themselves as part of this process just beyond casting a ballot. That's one thing, but it's more than that. So
I'm wondering if you can talk. So, this idea of bridging or communicating across generations, and you're a political science major. Shout out to the poli sci majors. So I mean, it might be we might be able to argue you have a little bit more of a background on some of these things than maybe your other peers do. I'm curious though. Everybody watches the news. Everybody sees what's going on. How do you think we draw the connection between this is what you see happening in the news, or here's what you hear happening about voting rights, and drawing the connection between this is kind of what happened historically and this is how we fought back and won rights in the past?
I think that's a really great question. I would say that um, to be able to bridge that gap, I think we could use social media and like recognize that technology has grown to be like such has completely transformed how we educate, how we mobilize, and how we organize. I think uh, when we think about organizing in the past and methods that, especially in the civil rights movement, that they would use, a lot of it would be through community meetings. It would be through advocacy at churches or schools or in neighborhoods, phone banking, all these different things that are still used today. But I think we're in a unique space where we have social media platforms that we can reach people beyond just people in our local areas, so people can still stay properly engaged with what's going on um, from Charlotte, if we're talking about something that's happening in Wilmington, right? And so I think it's incredibly important that we lean on technology, but at the same time, I think about Gen Z. I think a lot of times we see them as the technology generation because a lot of us, we grew up when everything was booming. So, in doing so, we have like a unique perspective, and a lot of times technology comes easier to us than previous generations. But at the same time, I think in the age of AI, like artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, social media, at the same time, I think Gen Z is becoming more and more hesitant to AI. And, I think about how in today's age, especially in 2020, due to the pandemic, everyone was in different areas utilizing things like infographics and, uh, ways to reach people from different areas. That was really great. But I think now when we have AI that can just in a second power flyers that can be posted and everything. It kind of just takes away from that human element. So when we're thinking about bridging the gap, I still have to say, when we think about bridging the gap, I think we need to remind people of how humanizing this work is, right? Like when we're using social media, I think it's important to highlight individual voices. I think it's incredibly impactful when you highlight the experience of one person, like one voter who is trying to make their way to the polls or trying to do whatever, but they keep running into issues that are not because of them, but because of just the way that it's now set up or the administrative side. Like being able to highlight that in a video and then posting it so that people can share it, I think really brings back the human element in advocacy. So in the age of technology, really just leaning on that level of storytelling to bring things full circle. And we can in turn highlight the past and the civil rights movements and the methods that they did. I think that is how we bring things full circle.
Y'all are kind of leading into what I'm really curious about. I love I'm a history major as well, so I love talking about the past and talking about how we got here. But also, you all have been doing this work at NC for a little while, but you've been doing it in your own academic and personal lives for a while too. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about just like the future of organizing and advocacy and kind of coming off this conversation about technology. And so I want to talk a little bit about research. Debbie, I'm curious if you can talk kind of about your experience in school as a community researcher, and how do we're talking about information. So like, how do we use information as a tool to fight back and to enhance the conversation that we're having?
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. And I love the fact that you started with the research bit because that's also something I'm very passionate about. And oftentimes, when you think about like some of this, I call them research processes or research strategies that are out there, I think they're doing that very thing that we in the past were hoping research would be able to do, like with community-based, participatory research or photo voice, which have really become like very wonderful ways where we can involve the community in real time. And so that's just something I wanted to appreciate. But then when we think about action, oftentimes as someone who's an upcoming researcher, I always say like we look for problems and try to solve them with research. But then if you're not someone who has that human aspect that, Alexia spoke about, it means you see like your research subjects as just research subjects and not as individuals. And so for me, when I think about one of the ways that we can be able to do that, especially as someone who has a social work background, is by seeing the people we are conducting this research with, not on, but with, and being able to tell those stories. One of the things I always say is if you're speaking, for instance, to a lawmaker, you may have amazing numbers that show, in, for instance, Chapel Hill, we had like 90% less voters than we had last time. But then if you tell a story and say, Alexia was one of the young people who came out, she registered like 100 people to vote, and she did that because her forefathers were also part of a movement that was doing that in their community. That tells a story. You're not talking about an individual and numbers only. You're talking about the impact that they've been able to make. So for me, when I think about action, I'm thinking about it along the lines of storytelling. And also one of the things that, to Alexia's point, she mentioned is that social media now has become like a tool. Someone once asked me, like, what are some of the places where you get your news from? And I mentioned social media because in real time, you will switch on Instagram and you'll see like a quick highlight or a short story that then will prompt you to want to know more. And so for me, when I think about action, those are some of the ways that, even though we want to tell like a very long story, but also thinking about condensing this information into something brief that will then prompt someone to want to see, okay, let's go down a rabbit hole and see what this actually means for me as a constituent of, let's say, Chapel Hill or Durham or whichever county you belong to. And so for me, this is some of the ways that I'm thinking about that you can take action. But the other thing that I'm thinking about is looking at an individual holistically. As a social worker, this is something we always learn, because at the end of the day, you're not only part of a family, you're part of a community. So everything that happens goes beyond what happens in the household. So there could be barriers maybe around the household, but there are also barriers in the community. Maybe let's say it's a community that, because a lot of the times that you see people who push back on not wanting to get involved in some of these actions is because they're afraid because of safety. And so if we take away those barriers that are all rounded that can hinder an individual from participating, then it means we are providing them with a space where they can actually be able to like voice their opinions. And so this is why I think about research as, so much more than that, because there's a lot you can do with research. And the good thing with research is the moment you document it, it sticks, like it stays there forever. It's not something that, will change over time. Obviously it will evolve, but it won't change. The fact that the information that you found at that time will still be relevant for that time, but it will continue to inform what's then relevant for the future that we are trying to build today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Kind of so thinking about how do we collect data, um, share data, present data in a way that promotes community, that promotes a holistic understanding and view of what democracy looks like. What you said about when you said AI, like my heart started going because that's a concern that I have. It's this extremely powerful tool that many folk, we have varying understandings of like how it produces information and how it works. And so I am curious about like from the consumer side, as somebody who, if you're receiving information, whether it be on social media or however you're getting your news, can you talk a little bit about like how do you sort through that, or how do you consume information in a way that allows you to feel like you can take action on it?
I think something that's very important is keeping mindful of your sources, right? Like everything that's on social media obviously isn't always factual, especially the sources that you're getting it from. It's so easy to take a statistic and blow it out of proportion, or even just create a statistic that's not even factual, that's not, pull it out of thin air and just put it on an infographic with a chart, and then people will believe it, right? Like, and even if they do cite a source, it may not even be correctly tied to that source. Like, I think, social media, like, a great part about it is that everyone can voice whatever opinions or concerns that they have, but there's also very little fact checking on that front. And so, when you're deciphering, I think it's so important for you to, like as Debbie said, if you see something that intrigues you, like if you find something on social media that catches your attention and you decide to go learn more, it's very important that you are almost taking it with a grain of salt, right? Unless you're getting your information from a reputable source that is gathering the data from quality research or peer-reviewed sources or quality news outlets, that kind of thing. But it's difficult when social media, as we see increasingly, becomes a space where a lot of people get their news now, right? Like, I think being able to follow that paper trail, like following where the person or where the account, where the site is getting that data from, is very important to in order to pick out the truth from a stretch of the truth. Yeah.
So, Alexia, a lot of what we've seen in the news, a lot of what we've talked about, have been outright efforts from elected officials to discourage students from participating, and particularly to discourage young and Black students from participating. And so it might be reasonable that folk are discouraged or maybe dismayed or don't think the political process is even for them. But we're seeing the exact opposite. So can you talk a little bit about what's happening, what has happened on A&T's campus in particular, and how students are getting activated in this time?
Yeah. I know A&T is a university that prides itself on civic engagement, especially because, the students who organized the sit-in movement in the 1960s were for A&T students. And I think in a lot of ways we reflect and look back to them a lot. But currently on campus, there have been a ton of different things for students to be involved in civic engagement efforts. For one, we have an office of leadership and civic engagement, and there we have various different work groups that students can join and lead to be able to be a part of those efforts. We have like voter education, voter registration, get out to vote, voter excitement, um, first year programs, athletics, like targeting all these populations of students to really make sure that they're properly registered, properly educated, and excited to be able to go vote. I'd also like to plug and highlight two incredible students on my campus. Their name is Olu Rouse and Shai Razier. They've done incredible work, especially this past year. They established a group called Protect Ours, and so they organized a bunch of A&T students to go to our Guilford County Board of Elections when we learned that there could be a possibility of them taking away our early polling site. They organized students to go there, march there, and advocate. And then when they did end up taking that away and it went to the State Board of Elections, they organized um, a production to get students from Greensboro all the way to Raleigh. I think the meeting was around like 9 a.m. and they had, they were able to get funding to have a shuttle to, get people to leave at 6 a.m., students to leave at 6 a.m. to go all the way to Raleigh and advocate. And it was a big protest and it made national news. And so I think it's very important to show that we're doing the work. Like students are properly educated, they're activated, they're engaged, they want to be a part of our civic process, but there just is so much that's going on to limit that. But it's not an issue of, you know, people saying it's not that young people, don't want to be a part of our government or a part of our democracy. We are clearly doing the work. We're clearly going above and beyond to be able to make that happen. And A&T is just one example of that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that to your point of like busting this narrative that young folk aren't involved when clearly they're leading the way. I mean, we have an example with you, the two of you all sitting here today, but also the program that you all are helping to lead, Democracy Summer. And so, Debbie, I'm curious if you can talk about kind of how are students activated and what are the work that they're doing to preserve democracy as a part of this program that you're helping to lead.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. And yeah, thank you, Alexia, for bringing that point up, especially like speaking about, I always believe in like one of the ways you're able to motivate young people is to also give them a shout out. And so that was like a really nice like way. So for me, when I think about Democracy Summer, but also someone who has been a first year and now coming back as a second year, you clearly get to see the difference. And one of the things I truly appreciate about the program is how holistic it is. So where you have Friendterns who are working with different regional managing organizers in the community. So that's like direct grassroots work. And some of the ways that they've been able to do that is because when you're meeting communities, you meet them where they're at. And that makes a huge difference. Something such as like attending like a town hall meeting, you get a lot of information from that. And that's where like the research bit, translates into that. And for people who are like passionate about, documenting people's stories, those are also some of the platforms where you can be able to document a lot of community stories. And so the work that Dem Summer does is kind of like bridging the gap between what's happening at, I would say, like at the national level with what's happening at the community level. And so this is where, things such as, having a team such as the policy team, being able to translate some of the bills, some of the legislative, some of the laws that are coming up into like actionable things that the community can do. Because at the end of the day, it's all about like complementing each other. I'm one person who believes that you cannot do, you can only go like so far when you're alone, but you can go much farther when you're part of a bigger team or a larger movement. And so with Dem Summer, this is like a very like an amazing opportunity for youth, specifically like college students, to come out and learn about, what does democracy look like? Because it's not just about like voting rights; it's about so much more. If you look at the things that we do during Dem Summer, it's about also even thinking about like fundraising, because a lot of us, these are skills that we haven't been privileged to learn in class, for instance. But then with like the mini grants campaign, you're able to learn how to speak to people about a topic or something that you're passionate about and fundraise for that. And that's a skill, it's a lifelong skill that you'll use. One day you'll find yourself like, for instance, working at the budget and tax center. And so now you see the value for money just because, that opportunity was given to you. But also, I love the point you mentioned, Brian, about you being passionate about history. It's the same with me. Even though I majored in counseling psychology for my undergrad, but history has always been like something that's to the core very important to me. And so with things such as the book club, where we get to read about some of the things that were done by our forefathers, just so that we can be where we are at today, makes a huge difference in a young person's life, even for me as an individual. And so I believe Dem Summer is like a really good opportunity to kind of leverage on some of the things Alexia was mentioning in terms of like, kind of like seeing where young people's voices at. And I always say, if to maybe reach out to RevStep or anyone else who's involved in like the selection committee, I'm sure they'll say like they had like hundreds of applications. And so what does that go? That responds to your question of young people are willing. If people are applying, it shows that they're willing to participate. They just need a place where they can feel seen, feel heard, and then just continue like contributing to the efforts that they're already doing. Yeah.
I mean, I think the point you made about if you want to go far, go together. It is making. I mean, we're talking about all the stuff that students are doing. It's a privilege to be able to speak with the two of you all, who I think are just again examples of the type of energy and the type of just intentionality that young folk in our community, in our state, in our democracy are pushing and making such a big difference. But in the realm of like getting there together. I'm curious, like what's the message for other generations, maybe, or for folk who are in charge? How do we make sure that we're not placing the burden of protecting and preserving our democracy squarely on on students and people who might not have the resources or the ability or the time, or like how do we make sure that we're fighting for democracy in a way that is much more equitable and sustainable?
I think that's the $1,000,000 question, right? I think you highlight a great point that young people and college students, as we've been sharing, have this increasingly growing burden to go above and beyond and do like proactive work when in reality, um, we shouldn't have to have these big marches to the polls or, protests at our boards of elections because voting should be accessible, right? Like, and that's not to say that, you know, we shouldn't be doing anything. Young people, just like all generations, have an obligation to be we have a civic duty to be involved in our communities. That's not, but I think when we have to continue to go above and beyond because lawmakers or policymakers are not always considering our populations, it's incredibly frustrating. So I think when we think about how do we encourage older generations to continue considering younger generations or other populations that are uniquely impacted by these voting decisions. I think it's important to remind them, especially when we think about generation, that they were once young people too, right? And I think, once you get established in your career and you're working and, you continue to get older, you are becoming more and more disconnected from that population. But if we're doing more to, establish those relationships and maintain them and keep them strong, it allows them to be able to like keep hearing the needs of our communities. So they're no longer not considering them because they always hear them, right? I think that goes for everything, not just young people. I think that goes for Black and brown people. I think that goes for people who have language barriers. I think that goes on all fronts, like improving relationships and continuing those relationships is incredibly important.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Alexa, I really love the point that you ended on in terms of like improving relationships. And one of the things I always say as someone who's just in Chapel Hill, I would say not permanently but temporarily, is I've learned the value of people having a conversation and getting to learn about diverse perspectives, because that makes a huge difference in someone's life. You get to understand people's histories, you understand the realities they've lived through, which I think makes a huge, huge difference. And this goes cross-cutting, whether the younger generation or the older generation. I'm trying to avoid using the word older and maybe say the wiser generation. And just coming back to your point, Brian, I was thinking about like one of the call to actions that I think would be something very important is also thinking about, I know this is like a bit of a tricky subject when it comes to like incentives, but also incentivizing young people, especially if you want them to give a contribution. One of the things I always say is you cannot, for instance, if maybe I'm involved in some sort of like canvassing and I'm trying to get people to come out to register to vote, and then keeping in mind, even though I have the willingness and I'm ready, ready to walk those miles, I'm ready to do whatever it takes. If I don't have a car, I'm ready to take the bus, whatever it takes. But then back home, I don't have food to eat. So you see, if you give me that incentive, at least I'm able to use that money to buy like something that I will need for my own personal use that will continue fueling that motivation for me to keep getting involved. So just, this is like a call to action for people who want to involve young people. Think about incentives. And I'm not saying give them like a big fat check. No, no, no. Just give them enough for them to be able to, because that's also one way for them to be able to grow in resilience, which also I'm against the word resilience, but for the purpose of this, we'll use resilience. And then it also gives them like a way to be able to see that, someone actually cares about what I'm passionate about. The other thing I would say is when it comes to like passing on the baton, maybe flip the coin a bit. Because you see, a lot of young people now, if they don't know what it entails, for instance, to be a senator, they don't see the value in even wanting to vie. So maybe flip the coin. If you're a senator and you're representing, let's say, X communities, go even to schools. Like go to schools just because I know schools have like days where there's days for like different activities, and so use those spaces where just make a visit to the school, have random conversations with kids, ask them, do you know what it means to be a senator? Because you see a lot of people doing that now on social media, like reading books to kids. And so those are some of the ways that you start engaging people from a tender age. And I say tender age because in order for someone to see their role, it has to start from somewhere. And so if you start from, let's say, middle school even, or even lower than that, depending on how the level of intake and information a kid is able to take in. But they're also, so the only way that we will be able to ensure like the wiser generation are able to pass on that baton is if they do that. Don't just wait for constituents to come to you. You go to them, and don't go to them in just specific spaces. Like expand your horizon, go to schools, go to the market, go to even, some of these fun activities that young people organize in the communities. Go to those, go to cookouts, because that's the place where you'll be able to meet, the young people who actually want to be you. But because they don't know what you do, they don't want to be you. So thinking about all of those things, I think would make a huge difference in a young person's life. And then we would now continue to see like more upcoming, politicians, young people stepping into the shoes of the wiser generation.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love and appreciate that also, just we're talking about what young folk can do and the opportunities available. And in the same breath, we should absolutely be saying, elected officials, you all need to be doing a better job of showing up in communities, doing town halls, going to schools, talking to folk. I mean, the other point you made about, incentives and the fact that people are facing really just real life constraints and barriers. We are in the process where we don't have a state budget. And so I think, we're talking about democracy issues in particular. But to your point, if our schools are underfunded, if our teachers don't have what they need, if we don't have access to clean water because we don't have the money for the infrastructure, then, those all, if we don't have good public transportation so people can get to the polling places, these are all factors that play into people's ability to participate. And so maybe I'm curious what you all might leave folk with, in terms of how do you take that energy and direct it into action, or how do you pull in your folk, your community, to be more engaged and to be and also, like, how do you do it in a way that feels good, that is sustainable, that feel that feels right? Like, yeah, how would you what would you say to folk?
Yeah, I think it's so important to be involved locally. I think with young people, there's always attention on what's going on a federal level, right? Like on a national level, when in reality, that is very important. But a lot of times, decisions that are made on a state and especially local level will impact you so much quicker than the things that happen on a national level. So being tapped in to things that are going on in your community, like in your city, in your town, in your county is like very important. As Debbie said, like even just going out to town halls or going to your community meetings or your county board of elections meetings or city council meetings. Like it's so important to stay tapped in, and then you can take that information and share it to your peers, to your family, or better yet, bring them with you, right? Like, I think we need to make being engaged, being tapped in, we need to make advocacy cool again, right? Like, we need to, make it a part of the norm to be like, okay, yes, if you're hanging out with your friends on a Tuesday evening to go get food, you're like, okay, well, how about before that we go to the city council meeting that's happening at 5, right? Like, and I feel like that's very powerful. And then, you can take that information and educate and go beyond that, right? And so, I think making it, the vibes good, making it cool starts with making it a norm. Making it, reminding people that it's a part of your civic duty to be tapped in, to be engaged. So I think that's a great start if you're a young person, wanting to get more education on that front. Like, get involved locally and you'll learn a lot, I promise.
Yeah, thank you, Alexia. I really like that ending bit where you learn a lot, I promise. For me, two things, communication and dialogue. One of the things I always believe in is that at the local level, there's a lot that's happening. I'm going to give a hypothetical example. Let's say maybe I'm the mayor of Chapel Hill. And so maybe we have like again, just like to your point, Brian, the budget hasn't been approved. And so there are some of the delays in things that I should be delivering to the citizens. But because I'm not telling them what's happening, people start hating on me and saying, I'm not delivering on what I promised. But I'm also facing a much bigger barrier than they know of. But you see, if you don't communicate to your constituencies, then they don't know what's happening. So I believe in open lines of communication. And so this is one thing I would really want to encourage anybody who's in a decision making position to always communicate with their constituencies or the people they serve, because that's the only way then they're able to know. Maybe they might even have a solution that could potentially be helpful to your strategy on making the community better. But you see, because you've not said what's happening, people think you're just sitting on this money and you're not doing anything for the community. So I believe in open lines of communication, but also engaging in dialogue. I always say everybody has something they bring to the table, whether it's someone who's involved in agricultural practice, whether it's someone who works at a hospital, whether it's a student, even a child, because kids nowadays, I remember when I was younger, whatever kids are exposed to these days is not what we were exposed to. So kids, they have a lot. Honestly, sometimes they'll school you and you'll be so shocked. So I do say that it's important to also ensure that when it comes to dialogue, this becomes like a space not only for the selected few, or in this case, for people who are considered as elite, because I believe everybody does have a contribution that they bring to the community. And so for me, this is one thing that I would say. And also when it comes to this work that we're doing in terms of like whether it's voter registration, whether it's holding our leaders accountable, I believe that each of this, it's always like it's small steps that lead towards like long-term actions. And so the moment we start small, and then we make small steps towards like in the right direction. And so when it comes to also this work that we're doing, especially when it comes to like, passing on information to people, encouraging people to come out and vote, it's also about like, it's something that you feel good about, because you said something that people can feel good about. It's like you knowing that because of the information session that you hosted about, for instance, what do people need to come out and vote? What are they missing? How do they get to the right sources to get whatever it is that they are missing? And then you realize, like, in that information session, so like 1,000 people registered to vote. That honestly in itself, for someone who's passionate about research, that's like a win. Then so the only way we are able to do that all is through these small efforts, but also taking time, as I finish up this, is taking time to reflect. One of the things I learned in social work is every time as a researcher, always do like a reflexibility statement. Like, who am I in this research that I'm conducting? What are my privileges? And so then when you think about that, then it makes it easier even when you're working alongside the people you're working alongside. So you're able to remove those privileges and see, even if I'm relaying this information, what are they going to do with this information? Is it even beneficial to them? But unless you do that, like critical thinking and reflect, then you kind of will be fighting like a losing battle, which is not what we're trying to do with this work. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. It's just, um, the small things, staying local, um, you know, I also love the idea that, like, we're not pretending that there isn't a message to electeds as well. I mean, I think it's fair to say that we're not happy in general with just the openness of our democracy. I think it's fair to say that not enough people are able to engage and participate. And so I'm appreciative of the fact that you all are able to speak to what are the actions that students are partaking in, and young folk are taking in, what are the opportunities, but then also, looking at other folk who are in charge and saying, like, this is what you need in order to be a better elected official or to be a better representative, especially the idea of you never know where the solution is going to come from. And oftentimes people in community, you guys were alluding to this, but people in community and people closest to the issues are often the ones who have the solutions, are the most interesting, the best solutions. Um, I, some of the stuff we talked about has been heavy. But one thing I've come to appreciate about the two of you in particular is that y'all always seem to bring a level of joy and excitement to the work. And so I'm curious if you all could share, like, what is something that brings you joy, and how do you remain happy in all this heaviness? Maybe happy isn't a word. How do you remain motivated?
Um, how do I remain motivated? I reflect on the powerful people who came before me, right? I think obviously with advocacy work, you're gonna face a lot of no's. And that was something that I learned in my first year internship, right? Like, it feels like it takes forever for a bill to be drafted and then to be able to make it to the floor, and then it just gets voted on so quickly. And like all of that work that you've done to educate and advocate for a specific thing could immediately get rejected like so quickly within a span of like 2 minutes. And so it's hard to not be discouraged when you're in that work. But I think about how, in the 60s and 70s and on forward, and prior to that, people faced so many no's and they still kept that fight going. And those no's weren't just saying, those no's may not have been, we're not gonna let you have accessible voting. It was like, do you even have civil rights, right? Like, it's things that we consider to be norms today and expected. They weren't, and they were controversial back then. And so, this was their livelihood, and they would continuously face no's, but they continuously still fought and still mobilized and still marched and still did all of these amazing things. And so, I think, who am I to give up on this fight because I face one no when there have been countless of people who have experienced so many more no's and have even died still, and hearing a no, and that was all that they heard. When in reality, in today, we face no's, but we also face a good amount of yeses. So I try to focus on those yeses, and that helps me to continue to stay motivated in this fight.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
really like that point, Alexia, especially the last bit where you mentioned like the yeses are what keeps you going. One of the things I would say, like similarly to you, I learning about like the various like civil rights movements that have been taking shape like over the years, for me is also a very strong motivation. And part of the reason why I was really drawn to the work that Democracy NC does is because it highlights those stories. And it's the same thing in my country. So I come from a post-genocide context, and one of the things that I always say is that we also had to go through like the genocide against the Tutsi, and then the liberation movement, which then led to the country that we have now. And so, I always say like there's certain things, it's also good to assess yourself and say, oh, I can do this, but I can also not do that. So at least I know I can be able to use my voice. I can be able to use dialogue. I can cook food and invite people to come and eat, and we can engage in dialogue. So for me, the things that bring me joy is knowing that a lot was done by our forefathers, but there's also so much more that I can do. And right now, I always tend to think like we're in a very good time where I can easily, if I want to speak to you, Brian, I can easily just send you a message and it will get to you in like seconds. But I think about like how back in the day you had to send a letter and wait and wait and wait. So that taught people a lot of patience, which I feel as though we don't have as much in this generation of ours. And so for me, one of the things I practice every day is to try to be patient and to understand things like beyond surface level. It takes a lot, and it takes a lot of practice to be able to do that, but I've found joy in that. The other thing I found joy is like having a positive attitude, like just waking up, even though the world is literally crumbling behind you, not even in front of you, just behind you. I say behind you, so you leave it there. And that has kept me going, knowing that even though everything looks like it's falling apart, but there are also some really amazing things that I can look forward to. And so I think for me that keeps me going. And then just engaging in great conversation. Because just like Alexia said, even when you bring like you're going out for dinner with your friends and say, let's go for this council meeting. So being in a space where I get to engage in conversation with people from different backgrounds, different marginalized communities, then you get to learn more. And so when you learn more, it also makes you kind of like broaden your horizon a little bit. And then you get to see the world from a very, different perspective. So for me, those are some of the things that bring me joy. And lastly, the other thing that brings me joy is knowing that we will never stop fighting. I know it's a harsh way to put it, but at the end of the day, it's the reality that we are facing. And we're in a world where we constantly have to fight for every single thing, but it's important to know that we're not starting from zero, which makes a huge difference. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We're not starting from zero because of all the work that we've been doing leading up to where we are now. Like it's never a zero that we're starting at. So that's a great point.
Thank you for joining us on Built by Us. To learn more about what's going on at Democracy North Carolina, follow us on socials, check out our website, and a special shout out to all the advocates and all the supporters who make this programming possible. If you'd like to donate directly to Democracy North Carolina, you can go to demnc.co/donate. And make sure that all this programming continues to happen. If you want to tap in with us, sign up for emails and make sure to follow along as we kick off our Freedom Rising Tour. We'll be traveling across the state to talk about the state of voting rights in North Carolina and what you can do to make sure that your voice is heard. Remember, they might move the lines, but we move the masses.